Perfect. What up, boys? What up? So, welcome. So, this is Agam Dewan here again. And so, I am a psychiatrist and I will be sharing my 1 year NoFap transformation. So, without any further ado, let us begin. This view, let's get this slideshow in motion. So, I think this before and after picture should tell you everything. Perfect. So let me share how I started this NoFap journey and we'll go from there. And so I was 27 years old. And at that time, somehow I managed to be dating this girl. So she wasn't the most attractive girl by any means, but we're in a relationship. And I remember one time that we were having sex and I just could not come. Like we had reached that point where it's like been 20 minutes or so, like you know that it's time to start wrapping things up, right? Like she's already had her thing, and like and you slightly start to get like bored of it, you're like, okay, you're moving on. And so I vividly remember like me standing up, her being on the bed looking back, right? And I remember thrusting, and I just could not ejaculate. Like it was not happening until I stopped thinking about her and started thinking about a girl who I had jacked off to on porn. I came in like 30 seconds. So I remember like having that realization, right? And so I had this happen, and so I was chatting with my buddy about it, and he goes, hey man, like I just started this new celibacy thing where I'm getting distracted and stuff, so I have vowed to not have sex and be celibate for a year. And so I was like, oh, like that's interesting because I'd heard about like NoFap and stuff, but I'd never fully invested into it. But this time I was like, you know what? Why don't we do that then? And so I made a bet with my buddy. The bet was that I would not jerk off for an entire year. If I did, then he got to punch me in the face. And so he agreed. We metaphorically shook on it. He was halfway across the country, but we agreed to this. Obviously, it's an honor system, right? So, if I respect our friendship enough, then I have the honor to tell him that. And yeah, so we made this bet that I could not jack off. And so after having made this bet, then I'm like, shit, like, what do we do? And what I started finding was that, I had all this energy. And like, I knew that I couldn't channel it. I couldn't just jack off. So I felt like this is when I felt the most motivated to actually start like working on my life. And like, I got really into looks maxing. Like, I was watching every day after school or after work, I would come home and watch Alex Costa videos and teaching men's fashion videos and Alpha M videos and just like literally just like absorbing all of their fashion and style tips. And slowly just like started implementing it myself too. And so like here is where me going into Banana Republic, trusting on some clothes. Here's like me trying to style different outfits. Like I had these pants, I had uh this shirt too, but then I actually got this tailored, just started looking into that and like seeing how outfits pair together. This is me like kind of some of my old Hinge photos and me like going through them all and examining them and like seeing which one would work and seeing which one wouldn't. Like this one, I'm surprised. I thought it would help me because like I feel like I look jacked, but like it didn't help me that much. And then here is me like testing out new watches and getting it fitted. Making sure that my wrist can fit watches, and then getting more into style, accessories, jewelry. And then here is me like trying to test out more outfits in general too. Like you can see, I have the watch here, right? You see the rings, the boots, fitted pants, right? Sweater, trying a little casual look, new glasses. So yeah, I was like, this is what my experimentation like looks maxing phase. And then I actually like started to get some success, right? So, I was improving my pictures. Like for these two, I hired a photographer. These two, I hired a separate photographer. Here, I went out with my sister and we took photos, right? You can see just like the level up in terms of the outfits. And yeah, I and like, just my personal style, like the hairstyle, of course, here too, more spiky here. That's straight. I didn't like swoosh it over anymore. You see accessories here, see a scarf here, right? Ring over here. And yeah, so I started to go on dates, and then actually started to have the opposite problem where I came too quickly. Like, I remember that I had this one girl over, right? And so she had come over. She came over for the first date, and then like we hung out, but then like, just kind of she left after a couple hours, and then we rescheduled, and she came over for the second date too. And so like this chick was super interesting because I remember that she was actually in an open relationship. And so she said that her partner knew everything that was going down. And like, this is something that she did from time to time. Like, I wasn't going to question it. And like, I vividly remember, like, we're making out, we're on the bed, and then she climbs on top of me, right? And then starts going up and down. Bro, I lasted like 10 seconds. 10. And like, I think the worst part was that like she didn't even put on a I didn't even have time to put on a condom because like she just started doing that. And yeah, literally just explode. Like, luckily I was able to tell her, and like she got off, and so, and like none of it went inside her or anything. But the point was is that now I started having the opposite problem, right? Where I was ejaculating out too quickly. And because I was so sensitive, I hadn't had any kind of like dick rubbing stimulation for the entire year. And so I remember I told my friends, I was like, we have a fraternity group chat from like back in college. And I was like, yo, like, I'm having this problem. I'm ejaculating too quickly. Like, what the fuck do I do? And one of my bros goes, like says how to give me various advice. And then one of them goes, bro, just take pre workout. And I was like, no, man, it's like 9 p.m. I'm not going to take pre workout during this time. But point being, right, like, you know, every time you level up to something, like you're always going to have new and new problems. You just learn how to solve those problems. But the point of this is that the look smack, the NoFap journey motivated me to self improve. And through self improvement, I was able to attract girls on a higher caliber than I was able to before. And like, that's what you have to do as a guy, is that you have to self improve. You have to become worthy of the girls, the guys that you have to become worthy of the girl, what the girls and like what they want. So getting more into the NoFap thing, right? Like, why does NoFap even work? So the the scientific explanation, I would give as a psychiatrist is that it's primarily has to do with dopamine. So dopamine is our reward transmitter, but also importantly is that it's our motivation transmitter. So it spikes up before we get a reward and like to anticipate getting that reward, right? So like, let's say we are about to have sex, right? It knows that, so it spikes up like right before we're having sex and while we're during when we're having sex. But then afterwards, when we finish doing that, then you have that dopamine crash because you go from having a high dopamine state to a low dopamine. That's exactly why, you have a bunch of sugar and like you have the high dopamine then crash, or you have any kind of like substance, right? Like alcohol, weed, or whatever, like you feel that pleasure, but then afterwards you kind of feel a little worse too. So it's both that yin and that yang, that spike and that crash. But then the problem is, right, is that fapping, what it does, it creates tolerance. The more pleasure spikes you have, the quick ones, the more uh, crashes you have. And so, like, the more tolerance, the more it takes for that pleasure spike to reach a higher and higher threshold, right? And so it takes more of that dopamine spike to get that same pleasure. Like, we've all had this experience of, you jack off 1 or 2 times, you might come in 5 minutes, and then you keep doing it for a week, and then you don't ejaculate until like 30 minutes or an hour. Like, you've built up both that physical tolerance as well as that dopamine tolerance. But the important thing here is that you also lose the motivation. Like, you lose the motivation to start doing stuff because dopamine is motivating. So if you raise your tolerance, then normal things will not motivate you. Whereas if your tolerance were lower, then like normal things, you'd be more motivated for like going to the gym or self improving. So that's why like dopamine detox works. And this is why now fapping is a form of dopamine detox. But like the bro science version of this is that as guys, like we are meant to reproduce, and like we work to reproduce. Like even in the caveman days, the guys who were the most successful, right, were probably the hunters or the village chieftain, or like the farmers who were able to provide for their women. So if you had some local bum, then they probably were not reproducing. So because like they probably one have low testosterone, but two, they're not providing anything of value. And so the whole point of living, of life, is for reproduction. Like that's the fundamental driver of it. And so the problem with fapping is that if your body thinks it's reproduced, then it doesn't need to do any of the work to be successful, to reproduce. Whereas if it hasn't reproduced, then like that farmer knows, that hunter knows that, okay, I have to farm and hunt so that way I can become a superior guy and get the opportunity to reproduce. And then the downside, of course, is that, once you think that you've reproduced, then you don't want any girls in real life. Like it's way more effort. You notice how like it takes way more effort to do something after you've jerked off than before? Like this is why. And so at least like going back to my story, like the benefits that I noticed are that one, like I was able to ejaculate much easier. Two, I was way more willing to take action to get girls in real life rather than just on a screen. I definitely feel more assertive and not drained when I retain my seed. And I'll give you a good example of this in my life. So I remember when I was a sophomore in college, we had this thing in organic chemistry. It was called recitation, and it's basically like kind of like chemistry lab, except like we'd be meeting together in groups and like going over the organic problems together. Point is, there was an attractive girl in my group and some of my friends, and this recitation was at 12 p.m. in this like dingy old building in like the middle of campus, on this building that like clearly needed to be demolished, and it kind of smelled like of sulfur when you walk in. But just giving you a picture. And I remember at like 10 a.m. or so, like, I was feeling a little horny and, rubbed one out before my class. I still remember that day because I remember like going to that class and like not even being able to look at this girl in the eye. And like I'd worked with her plenty of times before, so like she wasn't a stranger by any means, but like I felt like disgusting and gross, and I just felt like meek, like kind of keeping my head down, and like I came in even with my friends that were there, like I was way less jokey, I was much more reserved, like much less like extroverted, willing to like kind of be put there, just like way more like mute and tame. Like my volume was down to like 25% instead of like 100. And I just remember like leaving that class, kind of like, like putting my hoodie up and just like walking out and then like going back to my dorm. So, long story short, is that it makes you, by retaining that, I feel more assertive rather than drained. And then you can use that and then to channel you to do the work that you want to do. So I always feel way more work focused if I have not rubbed one out than if I have. So, hopefully that helps you with that, to have that motivation and the understanding of why NoFap is, I strongly believe in it. And some questions that I've run into, both with my patients as well as just like online, is that, do you have to do NoFap religiously? So no, I don't think so. So it's just like, when you drink or you eat junk food or like any other thing, like I don't think that you should cut it out completely, because like what's the point of life? Like we're here to enjoy vices too, otherwise like that's a spice that adds to life. 80/20, right? And so I think it's better to have it like a lifestyle where you don't really do no fap, or you don't really need to, so that way if you do it like once a blue moon, like you're not going to feel bad about it. It's like if you have a piece of candy, like it's not going to kill your diet. And then same thing here. Is it good to count streaks? So in my opinion, no, because I think it gives too much power to the negative and not to the positive. So there's like a saying that human beings, when they read, they often don't register the word not or like no, they just register the positive. For example, if I say, I am not feeling ugly today, then in our subconsciously in our brains, we don't even process the not and we process the word ugly. Whereas if you say, I am feeling hot today or sexy today, then you process the word sexy. So like you're focusing on the positive. And so if you keep focusing on like the relapse part, like, oh no, I was 50 days in and then I relapsed, then you're giving too much power to that relapse, that failure. So what I found is like it's best to just focus on other things and then let that no fapping stuff just happen like naturally, right? Like if you're out living your life, you're being social, you're actually going out with girls in real life, you're working on your business or your school or whatever, your content creation, then like you don't really have time to be like fucking around like that. Uh Next question, will it give me superpowers? Like no, like I think those claims are exaggerated. You're not just going to get some 900 level testosterone and just like storm around the place, right? No, I think it's just a tool that you can use to help focus you. Any side effects? So yeah, so I told, at least in my case, one, ejaculating quicker, but two, I also started having more wet dreams and morning wood. And this was a good sign, like I knew what I was on the right direction, was when I started having wet dreams more frequently. Like, when I was rubbing it out, then like I never had them. But then like over the course of like a couple weeks, a month, I started having them maybe like once a weekish. And so that's when I knew that, okay, like this is actually like I'm actually starting to build up some of my semen here. Now my body is trying to project it outward. And wet dreams aren't really cheating because you're not in control of that. And what happens when you relapse? You know, it's I don't think you should make too much of a big deal about it. Try to learn why it happened, what the triggers were, what caused it, what to do for next time. But don't beat yourself up over it, because it's in addiction psychiatry, we have a saying in that like relapse is part of the process, right? And so, like if some I've had patients who've been addicted to alcohol for like years, and then they quit for 3 months and they go back, and then might quit for 6 months and they go back, and they quit for 9 months and they go back, right? But the point is to measure uh the relapsing over time. Like let's say you did it like 15 times a month before, then now you're down to 10, now you're down to 5, then you're down to 2. Like you measure it over time, like over a month or over 3 months, and like you measure progress from there. Just like when you're measuring weight loss, you don't just measure it week to or day to day, you measure week by week, and you measure the trend over months to make sure that it's actually like that's what's happening. So yeah, hopefully I hope that was helpful to you. Like if you like this video and you want more content like this, uh please subscribe. And I just want to leave you with that fact that life is a video game, and so whatever mission you have to accomplish, do what you got to do to accomplish that. Like take whatever preparation you need, and to get those goals that we want, like we got to level up our characters, and that's what every man, every person has to do.